Imagine walking 36 miles just on foot.
Yeah, in heavy hobnailed shoes. No
Boy,
less.
your clothes are just, stiff with dust and
Wow,
sweat.
absolutely miserable.
And you actually have a pocket full of cash, money you literally bled for doing backbreaking physical labor.
Right.
So you walk into a town and you are fully willing to pay top dollar for just like a hot meal and a bed. But instead you are denied a simple glass of water.
Yeah.
You're threatened with a gun.
Yeah.
And it's all because of a single piece of yellow paper in your hand.
It's just a brutal image.
It really is. And today we are looking at the foundational mechanics of a society that was basically designed to crush the broken. And the shocking level of radical empathy it actually takes to disrupt that machine. Welcome to today's Deep Dive.
We are so thrilled to have you here with us.
We really are. So our mission today for you listening is to explore a truly fascinating stack of sources regarding Victor Hugo's monumental 19th century epic.
Yeah, we're looking at a brilliant historical introduction by Robert Toombs, along with the translator's notes from Christine Donougher.
Right. And of course, the incredibly gripping opening narrative of the novel itself.
It is the absolute definition of a foundational text. But what's striking to me is how thoroughly the actual gritty mechanics of the story get lost behind the pop culture phenomenon it became.
Oh, 100%. The musicals, the movies.
Exactly. When you actually sit down and read the text, it's this surgical dissection of justice, poverty, and human redemption.
It really is. Now, before we step fully into the text, I do want to make a quick but really important note for you listening.
Good call.
The sources we are looking at today deal heavily in some, incredibly politically charged discussions.
Very raw historical debates.
Right. We're talking about raw debates over the French Revolution, the morality of the monarchy, violent uprisings, extreme wealth inequality, all of it.
It covers a lot of intense ground.
It does. So I just want to make it crystal clear right up front that neither of us here are taking sides or endorsing any of these historical viewpoints or, making modern political statements.
Right. We are strictly and impartially reporting on the ideas in the debates exactly as Victor Hugo and the introductory authors presented them in the source material.
Precisely. We're here to examine the architecture of these ideas, not to advocate for them.
Exactly.
So to understand how that societal machine crushes people, we really have to look at what we call its victims. And the translator, Christine Donougher, made a choice that forces us to basically re-examine that entirely.
It's a massive shift.
It is. She changed the iconic title from the French, Les Miserables, to the English, The Wretched.
Which is a bold move.
I mean, translating a title that famous feels incredibly risky. It almost feels like renaming the Mona Lisa or Star Wars,
Yeah, you risk alienating an audience that has a very specific theatrical association with that French title.
Exactly. So why do it? Why take that risk?
Well, Donougher and the publishers executed this very intentionally to disrupt those exact cozy associations.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, over the last 150 years, the French title has almost become a brand name, right? It evokes sweeping musical numbers and barricades rather than, systemic poverty.
That makes a lot of sense.
So by rendering it as the wretched, they force the reader to confront the book's actual crusading message for social reform head on.
Wow.
And in English, the word carries a really crucial dual meaning that perfectly captures Hugo's whole thesis.
Who is what, exactly?
It conveys this deep, sorrowful pity for the downtrodden, but it simultaneously carries a harsh condemnation. Like, when society calls someone a wretch, it's a judgment of their moral character, not just their bad circumstance.
Oh, right. You're wretched, so you deserve it.
Exactly. Hugo himself actually wrote that there's a point where the poor and the wicked become mixed up in one fateful word.
That dual meaning really sets the stage perfectly. Society isn't just failing these people, it's actively condemning them for being failed. And there's another translation choice she makes that I think grounds the horror of the era even further. Instead of just referring to the French penal system as a prison or a penitentiary, she translates the word le ban as the prison hulks.
That distinction is historically vital because Le Bon wasn't a standard building with cells and iron bars.
Right.
It was a brutal, physically degrading naval punishment regime.
Like out on the water?
Yeah. Originally, prisoners were kept on decommissioned galleys, like literal floating wooden cages.
That sounds like a nightmare.
It was. And even when the system eventually moved to land-based naval arsenals, like in Toulon, it maintained that exact naval terror.
Wow.
Men were sentenced to hard labor and kept in heavy iron chains from the very first day of their sentence to the very last. They slept on wooden planks, still chained.
Oh my God.
So translating it as prison hulks really revives that specific, terrifying historical reality of men being treated as just, disposable maritime labor.
It paints a genuinely horrifying picture of the state apparatus back then. And the man documenting all this, Victor Hugo, based on the introduction, he seems to have lived several different political lifetimes himself.
He truly did. The historical stage tombs shows Hugo as a man who was constantly evolving, often in very contradictory ways.
Right, because he didn't start out as this progressive champion of the poor, did he?
Not at all. He started his political career as a staunch conservative royalist. He literally wrote odes for the Bourbon kings and sat in the conservative upper house.
That is wild to think about.
Yeah, but over decades, witnessing the brutal realities of Parisian poverty, he transitioned into this left-wing hero.
Right. But even then, it wasn't a straight line.
No. What's most striking is his complex metric for violent uprisings.
Yeah.
During the massive June 1848 Workers' Revolution, Hugo actively opposed the mob violence.
He actually marched with the military against the barricades in the streets.
He did. Yet in his magnum opus, he deeply romanticizes the student barricades of 1832.
See, that seems like a massive contradiction to me. To march against one barricade, but then romanticize another one in your definitive work on social justice.
It seems contradictory, yeah.
There has to be a specific metric he was using to judge that.
There was. And it all came down to his philosophy of historical momentum. Hugo believed that revolutions could be what he called the brutalities of progress.
The brutalities of progress. That's a strong phrase.
It is. If an armed uprising was genuinely moving society forward toward liberty and equality, he classified it as an insurrection, a necessary progressive storm.
Okay, I see.
But if an uprising threatened to drag society backward into chaos or pure directionless anarchy, he viewed it merely as a destructive riot. He judged the violence entirely by its historical and moral outcome.
Interesting. So if society is this wretched, crushing machine built on prison hulks and necessary storms, how does Hugo propose fixing it?
That's the big question.
Because he doesn't start his epic with a politician drafting legislation or, a general on those barricades.
No, he doesn't.
He starts with a man operating completely outside the traditional metrics of 19th century power. The Bishop of Digne, Monsieur Bienvenu.
Also known as Bishop Myriel.
Yeah.
His backstory is given an enormous amount of real estate at the very beginning of the novel.
It really is.
And that's because he serves as the absolute living antidote to the systemic cruelty we just outlined.
The details of his life in Digne are just staggering. He arrives to take up his post, and the official bishop's palace is this massive, beautiful, baronial hall with vast reception rooms.
Very luxurious.
Right. But right next door is this cramped, single-story hospital holding 26 desperate patients.
Yeah.
After touring the hospital, the bishop essentially looks at the math and says, there is a mistake here. There are 3 of us living in this huge palace and 26 of you suffocating in that tiny building.
Right.
And he just unilaterally swaps them. He moves the hospital into the palace, and he and his small household move into the cramped hospital.
He fundamentally restructures the institutional power of his position on day one.
And it extends to his finances, too. His state salary as bishop is a very comfortable 15,000 francs a year.
Which was a fortune back then.
Exactly. But he keeps exactly 1,000 francs for his own household to survive on.
Wow.
He then meticulously budgets the other 14,000 francs to various charities, orphanages, and prisons.
He gives it all away.
All of it. Later, when the local council tries to give him a perk by awarding him a 3,000 franc carriage allowance, he accepts it, but only to convert that money directly into more alms for the poor. He chooses to ride a donkey instead.
Now, looking at this from a modern, maybe cynical perspective...
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Isn't this extreme poverty almost performative?
Right. A display of piety rather than actual pragmatic charity.
Yeah, keeping only 1,000 francs, riding a donkey, famously refusing to ever put locks on his doors. It almost feels like a deliberate public relations strategy for a clergyman.
It really does. But the text explicitly counters that interpretation. Hugo asserts a very clear theological and moral stance here. He says, a wealthy priest is a contradiction in terms. The bishop isn't doing this for an audience. He's doing it because he believes true moral authority only comes from sharing the physical dirt, the vulnerability, and the danger of the poor.
So he's not just preaching vulnerability.
No, he lives it. We see this when he rides that donkey deep into the mountains, completely unescorted, into known bandit territory, just to visit some isolated shepherds.
And that vulnerability actually pays off, right?
It does. He ends up miraculously being gifted stolen cathedral treasure by the notorious bandit leader, Cravat, simply because he showed up without fear or judgment.
That's incredible. But there's a darker, much heavier mechanism, his extreme empathy too, right?
Yeah.
The sources detail a specific moment where the bishop is deeply traumatized by witnessing an execution by guillotine.
That scene is intense.
It's a profound architectural turning point for his character. Before that moment, the bishop, like most citizens, might have abstractly accepted the justice system.
Right, law and order.
But seeing the guillotine in person shatters that completely. He stops seeing the scaffold as a mere machine made of wood and iron.
How does he describe it?
He describes it in the text as a living monster that eats flesh and drinks blood.
That is a deeply visceral reaction to the concept of the justice system.
Because it exposes the ultimate hypocrisy of the state to him. He sees human law as fatally, irreversibly flawed because it dares to dispense death.
Wow.
It completely erodes his faith in human justice and transfers his allegiance entirely to divine grace.
But his empathy, while total, is mostly applied to the poor, the sick, and the repentant, right?
Honestly, yes.
But it gets put to a severe, uncomfortable, and highly intellectual test when he decides to visit a dying man who represents everything polite religious society absolutely hates.
Oh, this brings us to an incredible ideological showdown.
Yes. The bishop decides to visit a man known only as member of the Convention G. He's an exiled, unrepentant revolutionary, dying entirely alone in a remote valley.
And just for context for you listening, the National Convention was the revolutionary assembly that literally abolished the French monarchy and established the First Republic.
Exactly. And the town absolutely despises this man. They view him as an atheist and practically a regicide.
Yeah.
A man who voted for the end of the monarchy during the extreme violence of 1793.
The tension in this deathbed scene is just palpable. The bishop actually goes in feeling a rare sternness.
He's defensive.
Very defensive. He's stepping into the home of an ideological enemy. He challenges the revolutionary, specifically confronting him about the pitiless, bloody brutality of 1793 and the Reign of Terror.
But G is completely unbothered by the bishop's moral high ground.
Not even a little bit.
He defends the violence of the French Revolution as a necessary storm to end centuries of systemic tyranny. He proudly states that he voted for the end of prostitution for women, the end of slavery for men, the end of benightedness for children.
Right.
G is basically making the ultimate, you have to break a few eggs to make an omelet argument. Except the eggs are human lives.
That is exactly the framework he uses. He views the violence as a tragic but necessary mathematical equation for human progress.
Right.
The bishop, trying to maintain his moral stance, counters by bringing up a specific innocent victim.
The royal child.
Yes, the young royal child, Louis XVII, who suffered and died in prison. He uses the child to say, look at the innocent blood your revolution spilled.
And G turns that argument right back around on him with just devastating precision.
He really does.
He brings up the innocent peasant brother of Cartouche. For context, Cartouche was a notorious French outlaw, a highwayman.
Right.
G points out that Cartouche's innocent brother was tortured and hung by the armpits in a public square simply for being related to a criminal under the monarchy. G essentially demands that they weep for all innocence, sure, but insists they must start with the common people who have suffered the longest under centuries of royal oppression, not just the royal child who suffered during the revolution.
It's a powerful argument. And then G delivers the final intellectual blow.
What the
He points out the historical hypocrisy of the church's wealth. He notes that even though the bishop is personally poor and virtuous, the institution he represents, with its golden carriages and its 15,000 franc state salaries, has lived in massive luxury while the masses starved.
Oh man, that has to completely shatter the bishop's defensive posture.
It does. It completely disarms him. The bishop realizes the profound, undeniable truth in the dying revolutionary's words.
Yeah.
All his institutional authority just evaporates, and he humbly bows his head, admitting, "Vermissum, I am but a worm."
It's a fascinating subversion. The bishop goes in there intending to save the revolutionary's soul, but the revolutionary ends up fundamentally expanding the bishop's perspective on human suffering.
Exactly. G's peaceful, almost ecstatic death opens the bishop's mind. It stretches his empathy way beyond traditional, comfortable religious boundaries.
He stops seeing people through the lens of their political or legal labels.
Right, which brilliantly prepares him for the ultimate physical test of his principles.
And that test is about to walk right through his unlocked front door.
Yes, it is.
This high-minded intellectual debate about outcasts and suffering is about to become violently real. Enter Jean Valjean.
Valjean arrives in the town of Digue in October 1815. And the physical description Hugo provides is staggering.
He sounds terrifying.
He is a man reduced almost to a beast of burden. He's exhausted, covered in dust, his shirt open to reveal a hairy chest. He's wearing heavy hobnailed shoes and carrying a massive knotted stick.
And he's walked 36 miles on foot.
Exactly.
But he's carrying something far heavier than his stick, isn't he? A yellow passport.
Yes, the yellow passport.
This piece of paper legally brands him as a highly dangerous freed convict. He spent 19 years in those prison hulks we talked about earlier.
19 years.
5 years for stealing a single loaf of bread to feed his sister's starving children, and 14 additional years because he tried to escape that floating hell 4 different times.
And that yellow passport triggers a terrifying domino effect of absolute systemic rejection.
It really does.
Hugo isn't just writing an unlucky night for a protagonist here. He is systematically demonstrating how the state's legal label completely overrides both basic human economics and basic biology.
Give us an example of that.
Well, first, Valjean goes to the fine Quatrecolba Inn. The innkeeper, Jacquin Labarre, is cooking a massive, delicious dinner. And he is perfectly willing to serve Valjean because Valjean has money.
Right, he's a paying customer.
But the moment the innkeeper gets a note from the town hall about that yellow passport, the economics stop mattering. He kicks Valjean out immediately.
Then a lowly tavern kicks him out. A fishmonger actually warns the tavern owner about his identity.
It just spreads.
Even the local prison refuses him entry when he rings the bell and begs for a cell just to get out of the freezing wind.
He tries to sleep in a peasant shed, and the man threatens him with a double-barreled gun.
Think about it in today's terms for you listening. The yellow passport is essentially a permanent, inescapable digital footprint.
That's a great analogy.
It's like a background check that prevents you from getting housing, food, or basic human dignity, regardless of your actual current behavior or the money in your pocket.
Right.
Because Valjean actually had 109 francs. He earned that through 19 years of agonizing hard labor. He wasn't begging, he was a participating capitalist ready to pay.
But society refuses his money because it fundamentally refuses his humanity.
Yeah.
The state has declared him a monster, so society treats him as one. And the ultimate crushing indignity comes when he crawls into a dark hut for warmth, thinking it's an abandoned shed.
Oh, this car is awful.
It is. He discovers it's a dog kennel. A mastiff attacks him and drives him back out into the freezing night.
And Valjean just collapses in the street.
He cries out in pure existential despair, "I'm not even a dog." The social machine has successfully stripped him of his personhood.
So he is freezing, he is starving, and he is full of absolute justified hatred for the world.
Completely justified.
But finally, an old lady in the town square points him toward the bishop's small, unlocked house.
And by the time Valjean knocks on that door, his psychology is completely fractured. He expects nothing but hatred, fear, and violence, because that is literally the only language society has spoken to him for 2 decades.
Right.
This sets up the ultimate collision between the world's most cynical, broken man and the world's most radically empathetic man.
So Valjean bursts into the dining room. He leaves the door wide open behind him, clearly ready to fight or flee at a moment's notice.
He's on high alert.
Before the bishop or the servants can even say a word, Valjean loudly declares his criminal status. He practically screams about his yellow passport, his 19 years in the hulks, and fiercely demands food in exchange for his money.
He fully expects to be thrown out onto the street yet again.
And how does the bishop react?
He completely ignores the aggressive, violent posturing.
He doesn't even flinch.
He doesn't flinch, he doesn't ask for the passport, and he doesn't ask for the money. He simply turns to his servant, Madame Magloire, and calmly tells her to set another place at the table and put clean sheets on the guest bed in the alcove.
The psychological whiplash for Valjean in that moment must have been entirely paralyzing.
Oh, without a doubt.
The bishop addresses him as Monsieur. Valjean is so shocked he actually starts stammering. I mean, he hasn't been called Monsieur, a title of basic respect, in 19 years.
That single word acts like a glass of water to a man dying of thirst. The bishop tells Valjean that this is not his house, but the house of Jesus Christ. And he looks at this hardened, terrifying convict and calls him brother.
And then, to elevate the moment even further, the bishop tells his servant to bring out his prized, solid, silver-placed settings.
The only physical luxury he has kept in his life.
Exactly. Specifically to honor Valjean as a distinguished guest.
Yeah.
And during the meal, they don't even talk about Valjean's crimes. They sit there chatting pleasantly about the mountain cheese dairies of Pontarlier.
It's brilliant.
Now, it strikes me as almost counterintuitive that the bishop doesn't use this moment to preach to Valjean.
Really? How so?
Well, he has a captive audience of a confessed, hardened sinner. Why talk about cheese dairies? What is the psychological play there?
The psychological play is one of supreme delicacy, born from a deep understanding of trauma.
Okay.
When a man is an open, bleeding wound, which Valjean is at this exact moment, the kindest and most effective thing you can do is not to poke it.
That makes sense.
Preaching to him, demanding repentance, or even discussing his past would only reinforce the power dynamic of the righteous judge looking down on the wicked sinner.
It would remind Valjean of the state machinery that crushed him.
Exactly. By talking about ordinary, pleasant things like mountain cheese dairies, the bishop is treating him like a normal, equal human being. It might be the very first time in his adult life he has been granted that grace.
What Hugo has shown us here is the complete anatomy of a broken system. From the macro scale of historical barricades and floating prison hulks, down to the micro scale of a single yellow passport denying a man a glass of water.
It's all connected.
It is, and against that massive, crushing machine, he presents the radical, disruptive nature of true grace. Which brings it right back to you, listening to this.
Yeah.
It forces a reflection on our own societal machinery. Think about it. How many yellow passports do we enforce today? How often do we demand that people prove they deserve our basic fundamental decency before we grant it?
And that raises a lingering, somewhat unsettling question that is not directly answered by the text.
What's that?
Well, Valjean happened to knock on the one door in town where a man like Bishop Myriel lived.
Right.
But what if that old lady in the square had pointed him down a different street?
Oh, wow.
Is human redemption reliant on the sheer random luck of encountering an individual capable of radical grace? Or is it a mechanism we can actively build into the permanent fabric of our society?
That is a heavy, essential question to walk away with. We started out talking about how society can function as a machine designed to categorize and crush its broken parts. Today we saw one man who refused to be a gear in that machine and instead broke the entire mechanism of condemnation with a single, delicate act of humanity. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the source material. Keep questioning the world around you, and we'll see you next time.